I would first like to begin by extending a thank you to our members and donors who are here today. Your support made this event possible. And if you're not yet a member and enjoy this program, please consider joining today, as your gift will be matched dollar for dollar with our matching gift program. Visit gokm.org/membership to learn more. Now to introduce our speaker. Our presenter today is Linda M. Grasso. Linda is the author of Equal Under the Sky, Georgia O'Keeffe and 20th-Century Feminism, the first historical study of the artist's complex involvement and influence on U.S. feminism from the 1910s to the 1970s. Her most recent article, which compares the treatment of suffrage in two 1910s radical magazines, is included in Front Pages, Frontlines, Media in the Fight for Women's Suffrage. Linda is a professor of English at York College and of Liberal Studies at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Please welcome Linda.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me back to the museum. I'm really thrilled to be here this morning. And thank you to all of you who are joining us. I'm really humbled to have everybody here this morning, especially at this historic moment where we're acknowledging the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. And I also want to say, given the moment that we're in right now, that my heart goes out to all the people in Beirut and to everyone who's been ill or has lost someone because of the pandemic. So it's really a privilege to be here and to spend an hour at least on a sense of normality. Okay, so are we ready?
We are. You can go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Okay. Okay, so I'd like to begin this morning with a poem written by Jessica Jacobs, which is included in her collection Pelvis with Distance, which was published in 2015. And here's the cover of that book. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe is at the center of Jacobs's collection as both inspiration and subject. And you can see here
Linda,
that
we don't see your screen yet.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
What happened? What should we do? Sorry. I'm sorry. Can you see it now?
There we go. Now we see it.
Okay, but it's not moving. Sorry. No. Okay, sorry about that.
It's okay.
Okay, so here is the cover of Jessica Jacobs's collection of poetry, and this is the okay, I said that, the cover of the book. She's named the book after one of O'Keeffe's paintings, and she's also included a photograph of O'Keeffe taken by Stieglitz in 1921. So in some of the poems, now it's a beautiful collection. In some of the poems, Jacobs inhabits O'Keeffe's consciousness. In others, like the one I'm going to read to you, she imagines her persona in relation to O'Keeffe, yearning to know her and fantasizing that they share the same world. So here's the poem, To Find You, 5 Questions for Georgia by Jessica Jacobs. I was 6 when you died. Is that why it's so hard to see you as anything but outside of time? Did you ever water ski on Abiquiu Lake, watch the moon landing, drink Tang, listen to the Beatles, Velvet Underground, Joni Mitchell? Did you own a pair of Converse, wear something lacy, even once, under the chambray shirt? Did you use a computer, roller skate, worry about your karma or your chi? Would you have liked me? Jessica Jacobs's poem, in which she longs for connection with an artist who she believes has the vision of what could be and the will to make it so, is one of more than 500 poems written about Georgia O'Keeffe and her paintings, according to Italian scholar Cristiana Pagliarusco, who has cataloged and studied them. And by the way, here is Jessica Jacobs living in Abiquiu and channeling O'Keeffe as she works on her Pelvis with Distance collection. So what accounts for O'Keeffe's magnetic appeal across so many generations and genres? She and her art inspire poetry, fiction, song, cartoons, plays, dance performances, operas, and TV shows. Why is she so beloved, especially by women in the art world, academia, and in popular culture? Jacobs's poem, I think, gives us a clue. For so many, O'Keeffe exists outside of time. She's the female exception, the role model, the proof of possibility. She's the achieving woman who surpasses the male mentor and enabler, a tower of strength and endurance, living a long life in a self-created home in the desert, that symbolic place in which women bypass male structures and cultural expectation. She is a feminist icon who is outside of time. Her art and stories about her life inspire women to be fearless, audacious, and ceaselessly creative in their domestic work and romantic lives. And I think this image of O'Keeffe that was on the 1968 cover of Life magazine really captures that kind of mythic, timeless representation of her. She's outside of time here. So the greatest irony, though, is that one of our most cherished feminist icons is disconnected from feminist histories, movements, and women. So in this talk today, what I'd like to do is disrupt this severing and place O'Keeffe very much inside of time and talk about how early 20th century feminist ideas and activism affected her opportunities, life choices, and career. And then I will conclude by suggesting how we can reconsider O'Keeffe's career-long relationship to feminism. So let's begin in the 1910s, an important decade in O'Keeffe's life and career, and an equally important decade in US feminist history. In the 1910s, O'Keeffe was in her 20s, and she was questing, moving from place to place, trying to find the best way to express herself creatively while also supporting herself financially. And here she is, mid-decade 1915. I think I will go to South Carolina, she tells her friend Anita Politzer in 1915 when she was offered a job at a teacher's college for women. For time to do some things I want to as much as anything, it will be nearer freedom to me than New York. You see, I have to make a living. I don't know that I will ever be able to do it, just expressing myself as I want to. So it seems the best course is the one that leaves my mind freest. Is there such a word? I should probably have said most free. To work as I please and at the same time makes me some money. Now, during this formative period, O'Keeffe lived in Virginia, New York, South Carolina, and Texas, where she was either an art teacher or an art student. In this, she was like many young white middle-class women who trained to teach or become illustrators in the expanding art market. By the turn into the 20th century, female art students and teachers were not atypical. And I just want to give you a couple of examples here. This is a class at the Art Students League in Washington, D.C. in 1889. And here's another class at Florida State College for Women around 1910, 1911. Quote, "There are today thousands upon thousands of girl art students and women artists, where only a few years ago there was scarcely one." Candice Wheeler, a textile designer, entrepreneur, and women's art advocate, enthused in an article about women's art education that appeared in 1897. And here is Candice Wheeler. And one of the many fascinating things I found when I was working on this book is that she's actually buried in the historical cemetery at York College, which is where I work. And here is her tombstone. And I think it's interesting to note that this person who did so much for the field of interior design, who wrote so many books, partnered with Louis Tiffany, had this illustrious career. What's on her tombstone? Wife of Thomas Mason Wheeler. So employment opportunities made art a particularly appealing career path for young white women like O'Keeffe. In the post-Civil War era, the expansion of visual culture in the periodical press and in advertising fostered the growth of an art industry that profited from women's labor. And it also profited from the development of art schools at this time, also profited from women's students. Now, O'Keeffe's pursuit of art education and paid employment led her to modern urban metropolises on the East Coast and in the Midwest, as well as to developing southern cities and Western cattle country. She went to these places alone. She was not trailing a husband or moving with family. Each of these places and the experiences she had in them nourished her imagination and fortified her independence. Unmarried, mobile, and ambitious, O'Keeffe was what was then known as a new woman. And this was a term applied in this era to women who were entering public life through newly opened professional opportunities, civic reform activities, and leisure pursuits. New women were working class, middle class, and upper class. They were immigrants and native born. They were Black and white, and they were imaged in literature, paintings, and the media. And I just want to give you here three examples of this. The first two are by Charles Dana Gibson. This is the 1895 cover of Scribner's, and you see the woman mobile, very balanced on her way. And then this appeared in 1912, and it's called The Reason Dinner Was Late. And I think this one is really interesting because it gets at the lurking anxiety in the culture about the fear of shifting gender roles that the new woman occasioned. You can see here that the roles are reversed, that it's the woman laborer, the woman in the kitchen, who's the artist, drawing the male authority figure. And of course, the reason dinner is late is because the women who should be making that dinner are distracted by art. And the third example here is Vashti Turley, who is at Howard University. And here is Georgia O'Keeffe as a new woman. And we see that especially in that confident hand on her hip and the ease within which she seems to inhabit her body. Now, the changes in gender roles and expectations that O'Keeffe was living in the 1910s were in part, and I want to stress here that I'm only focusing on one small part of a constellation of historical factors that contributed to changes in gender roles between 1880 and 1920. But the part that I want to focus on is the long history of women's rights activism. Born in 1887, O'Keeffe came of age in an especially fertile period when multi-generational cross-currents on behalf of women's advancement existed concurrently. In the 1890s, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and other 19th century women's movement pioneers were in advanced age. This earlier generation had worked tirelessly to secure women's right to education and professional opportunities, a right that O'Keeffe was a beneficiary of when she studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Art Students League, and Teachers College at Columbia University. Quote, "If you ask me what offices women may fill," Margaret Fuller proclaimed in her 1845 polemic, Woman in the 19th Century, I reply, any. Let them be sea captains, if you will. Now, at the same time, the first generation is in decline. A second generation of leaders pursued and reinvigorated one of the earlier movement's most radical demands, the, quote, inalienable right to the elective franchise. In the 1910s, the campaign for women's suffrage gained a wide range of adherents and momentum, and it was a topic of conversation in newspapers, magazines, lecture halls, churches, and households. And here are just a few examples to give you a sense of how much women's suffrage was saturating a broad spectrum of media at this particular moment. Now, the suffrage movement, I believe, aided O'Keeffe's artistic development because it publicized examples of women's individual and collective power. O'Keeffe participated in the movement as an active observer. Quote, Mrs. Robinson, the woman senator from Colorado, was in Columbia, talked on suffrage last week. She was certainly great, funny too, O'Keeffe tells Politzer in a February 1916 letter. And here is Helen Ring Robinson. Significantly, before mentioning Robinson, O'Keeffe describes frustration, insecurity, and futility about art making, wondering if she will ever succeed. In the same letter, she also describes her response to John Marin's painting on the cover of 291, a short-lived avant-garde magazine published by Alfred Stieglitz and 3 other editors. Anita, it's just like a fine personality in the room, a fine expression of a fine personality. I believe it is the only kind of stuff there is any sense in. It just jumped up and slapped me in the face. Now, O'Keeffe yearned to make art like Marin's, art that had the power to strike forcefully. The suffrage movement, with its defiant assertion of women's equal right to citizenship, its flamboyant theatricality, and its involvement of fearless, smart women, encouraged O'Keeffe to be bold, self-trusting, and persistent. Movement tactics, such as staging grand parades and pageants, traveling around the country in conspicuously marked automobiles, organizing dances, concerts, and plays, and garnering publicity through picketing, media, and film, presented a variety of innovative ways to enact audacity. These strategies dramatized women's power, creativity, and inventiveness to the public and to receptive observers like O'Keeffe. Also during this very same period, feminism was first named and explored. I got Floyd Dell's Woman as World Builders a few days ago and got quite excited over it, O'Keeffe wrote to Anita Politzer in 1915. The professor was very much interested in feminism. That's why I read it. And here is the professor, Arthur McMahon. Actually, he was just a graduate student at the time at Columbia, and he was connected to civic reform and also to Greenwich Village radicals. So he had these two entrees into modernism at the time. Now, MacMahon was very much interested in feminism because the newly named movement was an integral part of modernist culture. In the 1910s, feminism as idea and lived practice was fresh, new, and invested with transformative power. Originally coined by a French women's rights advocate in the 1880s, the word became part of European vocabulary in the 1890s and gained currency in the US in the 1910s. At the time, the first people to use the word grappled with how to define it. Mary Jane Howe, a member of Heterodoxy, a club for, quote, unorthodox women that was formed in Greenwich Village in 1912, gave it a try, participating in a feminist symposium in the pages of another short-lived journal, this one a socialist journal. Howe notes that the term feminism has been foisted upon us because the culture needs an appropriate word to register that women are changing. She then proposes that feminism encompasses an amalgam of efforts in women's struggle for freedom. Feminism, she contends, is grand and revolutionary. It is not one movement or one organization, nor is it limited to any one cause or reform. It strives for equal rights, equal laws, equal opportunities, equal wages, equal standards, and a whole new world of human equality. Now, in Howe's conception, rectifying inequity is just one dimension of how feminism impels a changed world. The other critical component she discusses reveals how early 20th century feminist theories are imprinted with modernist vocabulary and concepts. Utilizing the newly popular language of psychology, Howe contends that feminism also ferments a changed psychology, the creation of a new consciousness in women. And remember, this is way before the 1970s. An evolved feminist, her term, exhibits this new consciousness when she does not let a love affair consume her life and refuses to rely on men's standard of what is womanly. Most important, a woman's new consciousness ensures that she thinks for herself. She lives according to her own convictions. If married, she retains her own identity. Underneath her wifehood and motherhood, she knows herself a human being with human capacities for work, service, and impersonal ideals. Now, feminism aligned perfectly with modernism. Like modernism, feminism was an ideological, political, and artistic response to modernity. Modernists championed rupture, innovation, and daring in art forms, styles, and perspectives. Feminists revolted against gender injustice using modernist thinking and aesthetics. Sorry, both modernists and feminists rejected traditional conventions and sought newness in personal expression, culture, and relationships. Now, new women out in the world mingling with men signified modernism. In addition to the workplace, new women interacted with men in new public places, such as amusement parks and dance halls. And I wanted to give you a couple of examples here. The first, this is from Luna Park in 1903 in Coney Island. And we know that O'Keeffe visited Coney Island with Stieglitz when she visited in 1917. And this is a Milwaukee dance hall from 1914. And in both you can see men and women interacting with each other. Sorry. And when these new women believed they were men's equals in work, play, education, and civic governance, they embraced feminist tenets. For the first time historically, women like O'Keeffe believed they could fashion their identities through meaningful work and not through familial, sexual, or marital relationships. And we have to realize just how radical this was for the time. Quote, "My work is just part of me," O'Keeffe told MacMahon, "quite a necessary part." Many of these women, including O'Keeffe, also boldly pursued sexual pleasure and dared to question and defy traditional gender norms. Conveying herself as a sexual magnet was one of O'Keeffe's primary modes of self-representation when she began an epistolary relationship with Alfred Stieglitz in 1916. And I think this photograph of her really captures that sense of flirtatiousness that she was such an important part of how she represented herself to Stieglitz in those early letters. So we can see that once we put O'Keeffe back into feminist history, her ambition, beliefs, and behaviors were in keeping with larger progressive movements for gender justice and social change. And we can also see that in O'Keeffe's most formative period, the woman question in some form, as Stieglitz put it in a 1916 letter, was part of everyday life. It was the zeitgeist of the time. O'Keeffe benefited from, was shaped by, and eventually contributed to this exciting new constellation of ideas about women's equality, independence, and freedom. In the 1910s, O'Keeffe was steeped in feminist ideas and practices through reading and personal relationships. She was reading feminist modernist periodicals such as Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Forerunner, The Masses, and what we now regard as feminist classics, Ibsen's A Doll's House, and Olive Schreiner's Woman in Labor. And she was participating in a lively exchange network with Anita Politzer, Arthur McMahon, and Alfred Stieglitz, each of whom was connected to various forms of feminist philosophies and activism that they shared with her by sending her books, magazines, and describing their experiences. Feminism, I believe, as Mary Jenny Howe broadly conceived of it, supplied O'Keeffe with a philosophy and approach to living that she maintained throughout her lifetime. In this early period, feminism enabled her to push at the boundaries of what constituted an acceptable career in art for women. And feminism made daring, defiance, and boldness, which were key to modernist aesthetics, available to her as a woman. It is significant, I think, that it is precisely during these years when O'Keeffe was living feminism and thrilling to feminist ideas that she first began to produce the distinctive, innovative work that launched her career. Here's just a few examples. Now, O'Keeffe gained a great deal when she dared to use feminist ideologies and practices to create an identity, inspire her art, and imagine a career. Her physical mobility, irreverent ambition, and perceptions of herself as, quote, a damnably independent, self-sufficient young woman, as she described herself to Stieglitz, were characteristic of other women who shared her creed. Quote, "I believe in having everything and doing everything you want if you really want to and if you can in any possible way," she declared in a letter to Politzer in 1915. She repeated this conviction to Stieglitz in 1916. "I want to do everything in the world," she told him, in her excitement about the depth of her feelings and the possibilities she imagined. O'Keeffe's lifelong understanding of feminism was grounded in a modernist ethos that celebrated rebellion, innovation, and individual self-expression. She became a modern artist and infused modernist sensibilities into the places she lived and the clothes she wore by using feminism as an authorizing base and structure. For O'Keeffe and for many others, feminism in the 1910s was a metnym for possibility. So, to bring us back to where we started, isn't it ironic that the Georgia O'Keeffe, who is so beloved as a feminist icon, had such a complicated and vexed history of feminism, including her own feminist history? Almost a month ago to the day, a young art historian, Josephine May Bailey, included O'Keeffe in an article she wrote for Daily Art magazine called "The Feminist Artist Whose Work Changed the World." Characterizing O'Keeffe as a non-feminist feminist icon, she says, O'Keeffe refused to join the feminist art movement or cooperate with any women projects. She hated being called a woman artist and famously was angered by her inclusion in Chicago's dinner party. But then she concludes emphatically, despite this, O'Keeffe is a feminist icon. Her fiery personality and iconic works have influenced generations of feminist artists, regardless of whether she wanted them to or not. Now, I'm especially struck with two things here. One is Bailey's underlying assumption that feminist history begins in the 1970s, the reference to Judy Chicago's dinner party, and the other is that O'Keeffe is a feminist icon because of her, quote, fiery personality, as well as her iconic works. And here we see that one of the reasons O'Keeffe remains an iconic feminist figure is because perceptions about her life are just as important as appreciation of her art. Yet O'Keeffe had a vexed, complicated, and contradictory relationship to feminism. As I've just discussed, she embraced the first feminist movement in the 1910s when she was in her 20s and at the beginning of her career, but disdained another iteration of it in the 1970s when she was in her 80s, and by that point attempting to script her own legacy. She spoke openly about the discrimination and bias she was subjected to as a woman who desired to paint, but she refused to identify as a woman artist or to support publicly other women artists by participating in women's art exhibitions or speaking on their behalf. And this was true well before the 1970s. So, was O'Keeffe a feminist? So I want to answer that question, as I do in the book, in two ways. First, the label feminist during O'Keeffe's lifetime, as it is now, was highly contested and debated. Some did not want to be labeled a feminist or even use that term. And this was true of Charlotte Perkins Gilman, the most influential feminist theorist of the early 20th century, whose essays, stories, and poetry O'Keeffe read in Gilman's monthly magazine, The Forerunner, which I just showed you a couple of minutes ago. Now, Gilman disavowed the term feminist because it was associated with her rival, the Swedish feminist, Ellen Key, who advocated a brand of feminism that Gilman hated. Key's feminism was rooted in the idea that women's biological difference from men was a source of strength, whereas Gilman's feminism stressed that women's shared humanity with men made them men's equals. So given these historical realities, I propose rethinking the question itself. Let's not ask, was she or wasn't she a feminist, but rather what did she do in various historical moments to advance women's rights and freedoms. And to this end, I apply the contemporary concept of feminist practices to understand O'Keeffe's feminist politics. Feminist practices are behaviors that promote women as a group, identify and protest discrimination, and seek restorative justice. Using this approach, I document several instances in which O'Keeffe advanced feminism through institutional activism. For example, she maintained an affiliation with the National Woman's Party, a self-described feminist organization from the 1910s to the 1950s. Her connection to the National Woman's Party was unquestionably through Anita Politzer, her friend who had abandoned a career in art. That's how O'Keeffe had met her at Columbia when they were both art students. And instead, Anita became involved in party leadership, serving in various high-level functions, including that of national chairman from 1945 to 1949. And it was the National Woman's Party that really was responsible for the kind of radical tactics, such as protesting in front of the White House and the grand marches and the pageants, those images I showed you earlier in the 1910s. But they kept going as an organization even after suffrage was achieved for white women in 1919. Now, ultimately, I conclude that it's not O'Keeffe's institutional activism, but rather her art making that was her greatest feminist practice, not contributions to legislation, institution building, and public protest. And I use the idea of art making to include not only drawings, paintings, and sculpture, but also the way O'Keeffe made art using her physical body, domestic interiors, and life choices as if they were canvases. So I'm suggesting that it was the ways in which O'Keeffe approached art making, broadly conceived, from the 1910s to the 1970s, that can be considered feminist practices. So I'd like to conclude here by reading a few excerpts from the last chapter of the book so you get a sense of how I make this case. O'Keeffe's art nurtures feminist imaginings. To begin with, her art is defiant, oppositional, destabilizing, and gender-conscious attributes of feminism itself. Grounded in feminist reading, philosophy, and practices as she evolved as an artist, O'Keeffe enacted her belief in gender equality in how she approached, discussed, and made art. To her, gender equality meant that women had the same right as men to artistic imagination, access, and opportunities. Art, she believed, was self-expression, and women had the same right to that expression as men. At the same time, however, she also understood equality to mean equality in difference. Since gender identity was an element of self, it impacted on one's artistic expression. For O'Keeffe, then, equality encompassed the idea that a woman's vision was as important as a man's. Her creations are feminist interventions, most basically because they offer a modernist white woman's ways of seeing. Regardless of her intentions, her art is a gallery of feminist claims about women's right to revel in art making. Utilizing a breadth of forms and mediums, she traversed gendered boundaries and experimented in them all. She created realistic and non-representational pictures in charcoal, watercolor, and oil. Her treatment of subjects was equally expansive. In some instances, her flowers are small, delicate, and chaste. In others, they are big, strong, and sexy. She was equally compelled by the small and the large. She painted shells, flowers, rocks, vegetables, fruits, and eggs, as well as trees, rivers, waterfalls, skies, and cliffs. She rendered the softness of feathers, flower petals, and mesas alongside the hardness of bones, shingles, and stones. Even the shapes and colors she chose encompass female and male-identified signifiers, ovals and rectangles, pastels and grays. Now, at the same time O'Keeffe claimed dual-gendered artistic worlds, she also affirmed women's ways of seeing, refusing to relinquish the part of herself that was, quote, all of a woman. She made traditional feminine codes, such as flowers, powerful by severing them from familiar contexts, investing them with importance, and altering their scale. Like women liberating from the confining restraints of corsets, her magnified flowers are muscular and bold. They fill the canvas the way new women fill the modern public world, a fitting emblem of recently enfranchised white female citizens. Her never-fading flowers signify feminist hopefulness for a universe in which men and women are equally valuable. O'Keeffe also inspired feminist imaginings about women's worth by claiming domesticity as a form of creativity. After her permanent move to New Mexico, she owned and presided over 2 houses, not just one, which conveyed the idea that homemaking was desirable. Pictures of O'Keeffe in popular magazines, relaxing in recliners, tending her garden, and sitting serenely in her studio, gazing upon mountainous vistas, circulated the notion that domesticity was powerful, pleasurable, and creative. The arrangement of objects, preparation of foods, and appreciation of quotidian activities, such as walking with dogs, listening to music, and hosting visitors, communicated that women's everyday lives could be artful. Just as significant, O'Keeffe's equal claim to sexual imagination was a generative feminist intervention. Imagination certainly is an entertaining thing to have, she told Anita Politzer in 1915. When O'Keeffe was creating herself as a modernist in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, sexuality was considered an essential part of the self, a vital form of self-expression. Sexuality was also a major concern of new women feminists who demanded that women have control over their reproductive lives and were entitled to sexual pleasure. As a painter responding to her environment, O'Keeffe engaged sexuality as male artists had done for centuries. Painting the reproductive anatomy of flowers, she called attention to sexuality and the inventive ways in which it could be imagined. In the most provocative pictures, she used modernist techniques, such as magnifying subjects isolated from their context to make visible feminist claims for women's right to a free and rapturous sexual imagination. Additionally, she expanded the notion of equality to include forging new connections between flowers and women. When O'Keeffe began to create enlarged flowers in the 1920s, images of women as man-eating evil flowers proliferated in popular and high culture, a response, I believe, to 1910's feminism. O'Keeffe's flowers counter these misogynistic associations. Lush, awesome, and beautiful, her flowers evoke joyfulness, an equivalency of the kind of freedom women gain when heterosexual sex was no longer tied to reproduction, or when women chose women as sexual partners. O'Keeffe's self-fashioning also inspires feminist imaginings about women's power over self-representation. Throughout her career, she designed a sartorial aesthetic that encompassed male and female signifiers, which communicated her respect for both. Like men, she wore clothing that was unconstricting, functional, and uniform. Her dresses, skirts, blue jeans, and flat shoes facilitated mobility and de-emphasized the importance of appearance. The black suits she wore to exhibitions conveyed professionalism. She styled her hair simply, pulled back from her face and body, yet she never cut it short or colored it. Thus her long hair was a resonant symbol of womanhood as well as feminist defiance. Never jettisoning women's attire, she instead infused it with feminist flourishes, drawing inspiration from new women, feminist, lesbian, Southwestern, Asian, and religious women's communities. Disdaining feminine artifice such as cosmetics and remaining independent of current fashions connected her to 19th century women's rights activists and National Women's Party feminists who believed that investing inordinate time on appearance distracted women from their intellectual development and professional pursuits. In the final analysis, O'Keeffe's ambition to compel new sight is her most enduring form of feminist activism. Her public explanations about the flower paintings, which she reiterated over the course of 40 years, all include the same point. More than anything else, she insists, she painted flowers large because she wanted to enable a new way of looking, a new way of seeing. I have painted what each flower is to me, and I have painted it big enough so that others would see what I see. In a culture that remains stratified by gender, for women artists to challenge others to see what they see continues to be a feminist intervention of monumental proportions. To command sight is an exertion of power that unsettles gendered artistic hierarchies. When O'Keeffe spoke through the language of colors, lines, and shapes, and expected viewers to respond to her lexicon, she needed confidence, authority, skill, and receptive audiences willing to translate. Women's feminist traditions created those audiences during O'Keeffe's lifetime and continue to do so today. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay.
Stop sharing your screen.
Okay. Oh.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And we have so many comments. So many people are saying they've read your book and it's just wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
If you have any questions for Linda, please put those in the chat. Oh, we have a question on where was O'Keeffe on racial equality? Did you come across that at all in your research?
No. I could attempt to answer that. No one that I know of. I think there's a dissertation on her relationship with Native Americans in the community. I'm not familiar with it. But as to my knowledge, no one has really tackled this question. So I don't think that she was connected or aware about racial equality. And she basically admits that, I quote that in the book, in the 1940s, when she goes to Fisk, and she meets a young woman who she's very, very impressed with, a young Black woman. And she says something like that, it never occurred to me how much color could affect one's life, or something like this. So I don't think that she was particularly conscious or aware. And there was, of course, a huge split, as there is in all of American culture within the suffrage movement, over race. And the Alice Paul, who was Anita Politzer's mentor, believed very strongly that race should be separated out. She, from the feminist struggle, that was not something that everyone believed at the time, but she believed that, and there were, Black women did resist that, and they did participate in the marches, but because of I have to stop talking, but because of the alliance, the white women wanted to make alliance with Southern white women, Black women were betrayed in the movement. But anyway, in general, I think that O'Keeffe wasn't particularly aware or conscious, or that cared really that much about racial equality until much later. I would think that she had a very intense relationship with Jean Toomer. Some believe it was sexual. I think that perhaps influenced her. So,
like you said, it sounds like a research project.
yes, very much so.
Take on.
So, yeah.
So, how long did it take you to do all this research, and what sparked your interest in pursuing this?
Oh my goodness. I worked on this book for a very, very long time, in and out of other things, teaching and sharing. I think what interested me was the more I learned about O'Keeffe, the more it seemed like she was a perfect lens through which to look at women's history. And I had studied women's history, privileged to have studied with Mary Jo Buell, among many other scholars in graduate school and as an undergraduate. So I knew a lot about women's history, and so I just became more and more fascinated. And I would never have finished the book if I kept trailing all the issues and questions that continue to fascinate me. One could spend one's life on O'Keeffe, certainly.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question. Sorry, I need to scroll back up to it. Did you in your research, did you explore Georgia's early rural beginnings and being brought up in a large family with excellent women role models? How do you think that affected her development?
I know that biographer Roxana Robinson talks about this a bit. I do think that it probably affected her, but I think she, as an artist, I think she wanted to distance herself from that earlier women's culture that nurtured her, and that's part of the among the many contradictions that I see. So I know that much has been made of the fact that her grandmother painted and somebody else painted, and her mother had framed her pictures and this kind of thing, but she definitely wants to distance herself from that because she wants to portray herself as a modernist and not sentimental in any kind of way. But definitely, I think, you know, having strong women, there was her Aunt Ollie, there was her grandmother. She doesn't talk much about her mother that I'm aware of, which is interesting. Although I know she doesn't talk that much at all about her childhood, except in her book. So we don't really know a lot, but yeah, I would think that, and also I know Roxana, I'll defer to Roxana Robinson on this. Roxana talks about the importance of the wide open landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yes, another biography that you could purchase in our museums. Another question, how complicated is it to form an argument like she didn't like the label as being a feminist, but her work and persona gave this idea, as well as far as I understand, she also didn't like to tell she was painting something sexual about her flowers and actually didn't like this label as well. How complicated is it to separate what the artist is telling and what their work is making people see?
Well, I guess everything all comes down to interpretation, right? And I guess to be good, I tried to be as best a scholar as I could be by acknowledging what O'Keeffe told us she believed and wanted, but then also I think we need to interpret based on as much historical understanding as we possibly can. So I think keeping those two things in play is extremely important. I think everything about her is about interpretation. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's really the reason why I think among the many reasons why she remains so beloved is the stories that are attached to her. and associated with her. And that's been true since when she first started painting, and became, you know, a well-known artist in the 20s.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you for that, for all these questions, by the way.
We also have a question about the romance between Georgia O'Keeffe and Arthur McMahon. Just if you could comment on that.
Well, I did read his side of the correspondence, which is at the Beinecke, and I had the privilege and pleasure of interviewing his son when I was working on the book. And what was interesting about that was that his son knew absolutely nothing about his father's friendship and relationship with Georgia O'Keeffe, and it had been his grandmother who kept this copious correspondence that they had. I think she was totally madly in love with him. I mean, that's clear from the letters that she writes to Anita Politzer about him. She also writes about him to Stieglitz when they first start corresponding. And it seems like they kept in touch at least until about 1938, I think, was the last exchange. So I don't really know, you know, so much of what we can reconstruct is either through the correspondence, if there is correspondence, or through the memories of other people. And of course, memories, it's another one of those interpretations, right? Because memory changes as time goes on, and we remake memories. But from everything I know, we just have that correspondence about them. But I think she was very intrigued by him because apparently he was incredibly smart and he loved nature and walking. That's how they met at the University of Virginia. He was teaching, and she was in, I think she was just beginning to teach there also. And they would go on these walks together. And then he went for that one visit in South Carolina when she was there. And then she, you know, he sort of drops out of the scene, and she becomes obsessed with Stieglitz.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Well, with that, we will end our talk. So thank you so much, Linda, for presenting today. And again, Linda's book is Equal Under the Sky, which is, I've read it. It's a wonderful read. It's so well researched. So thank you for presenting today. And this talk will be posted on our website next week.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Bye-bye.